I think we need to look at the full range of our bilateral and multilateral arrangements with the Russians and review them in a serious fashion, because there need to be consequences.
There have been several writers who, condemning the Russian assault, to be sure, but criticized the Bush administration for, in effect, emboldening the Georgians in this case, getting into a fight that they couldn't win. There's a comment here I saw from Senator Obama. I'll put it up on the screen, from July 23rd, before this crisis actually evolved. Here's what he said: "Only a political settlement can resolve the conflicts over Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Russia needs to roll back the aggressive actions it has taken in the last 3 months. The Georgian government must resist the temptation to be drawn into a military conflict. All parties must make clear that they are committed to a diplomatic settlement and will not try to resolve this dispute by force."
Prescient.
I think. I think that it's an interesting comment, because it is in line with those who suggest that, yes, Russia's been aggressive, but that the Georgian government was in danger of overreaching. Do you fault the Bush administration in this regard at all?
Well, I think, quite honestly, Jim, while Secretary Rice is abroad trying to negotiate a diplomatic resolution of this, it's not particularly helpful or constructive to go back and do the "who shot John." That we'll have time to do that, and that's for historians to do. But I think right now the United States and all of us need to send a clear message of support to the Georgian government and the Georgian people, and a very forceful message to Russia that their policies and their actions are absolutely unacceptable and will not be tolerated.
What would a Barack Obama administration do with Russia? How would it deal with Russia in the future? There are some who suggest a new Cold War is in the offing, that there's a competition for power in Europe between the U.S., its NATO allies, and Russia, and that this is the first shot, or maybe the most recent shot, in that conflict. Is there a difference in how you would move forward?
Well, this is obviously an extremely troubling and dangerous development, and Russia's intentions are now signaled to be quite malevolent in the region. We'll see how Russia responds in the coming days, and whether they will adhere to the ceasefire that they committed to, whether they'll withdraw. They're going to have to be penalized and punished for what they've done, because we cannot send a message that this sort of behavior, this sort of aggression, will be tolerated and replicated elsewhere. But we have a complex set of issues that we will continue to have to work through with Russia, but we need to convey that when they violate human rights, when they violate international law, when they challenge and invade the sovereignty of other countries, the international community won't stand for it.
Let's get on to the trip. I want to talk with you about the trip. You were there for parts of it, I believe.
Senator Obama's trip to the Middle East.
The trip to the Middle East. We started, we've done a couple of shows on the trip from those who have observed it, but you were a participant. I want to start, if we could, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and move west as the trip itself moved west.
Just to be clear, though, Jim, I was not on the Afghanistan-Iraq portion of it.
But I want to talk about that part of it in this regard.
Sure.
There appears to be, at least on Afghanistan, a growing convergence around Obama's position with regard to the need to beef up forces there and deal more aggressively with the threat that Afghanistan poses. Do you see this administration taking the steps that you are calling for?
Well, Senator Obama's been concerned about Afghanistan for years and has been talking about it repeatedly in the context of the campaign. Of course, he opposed the war in Iraq for many reasons, one of which was that it would divert our energy and attention from Afghanistan, which is where the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, as well as in the border areas of Pakistan, are resurgent and regrouping. So Senator Obama's view is that we have got our priorities confused. And indeed, we need to take care of the growing and serious threat that Al-Qaeda and the Taliban pose in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Part of the answer to that is to have at least 2 additional combat brigades in Afghanistan. But this is not something that can be solved through military means alone. We have to have a much more effective approach to Pakistan and counterterrorism cooperation in Pakistan. In both Pakistan and Afghanistan, we need to be part of providing a better future for the people in these countries and not aligning ourselves solely with leaders, particularly in Pakistan, where Musharraf really hasn't had the interests of his people sufficiently at heart. He would invest a great deal more in the economic and social development of these countries, particularly in Afghanistan, but also in the tribal areas of Pakistan, which have been so underdeveloped and are now being exploited by these extremist elements. So we need a multifaceted strategy: political, economic, social, and indeed security, and devote the attention to these important places that they deserve. So the administration has come to this concern belatedly and is hamstrung by its refusal to prioritize Afghanistan over Iraq. And indeed, as long as we maintain a high level of forces in Iraq and all of our political and diplomatic and effort and attention on Iraq, we're unable by definition to invest sufficiently in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and we've seen the consequences.
About Iraq, it was interesting that before he went, comments were made in Iraq that were then repudiated but then reaffirmed in favor of a timetable similar to the one he's called for.
Very similar.
And there appears to now be, as part of this annex to the Standard of Forces Agreement, that the Status of Forces Agreement that we're negotiating with Iraq, an agreement as well on a timetable, at least a loose timetable that moves, I guess, to 2010 as a phased out U.S. presence. Is that comforting, that there's an agreement there, or a movement in that direction? And do you think that the Status of Forces Agreement either ties your hands or frees your hands on this issue?
Well, Senator Obama's clear view, and he stated it repeatedly for many months, is that any agreement negotiated with the Iraqis ought to come to our Congress for approval and should not constrain the decision-making of our next president. Mm-hmm. That's a matter of strong principle. But when it comes to a timetable, Senator Obama has been saying for several years now that it's time for the United States to indicate that it's leaving on a predictable and responsible schedule. There will be some residual presence required for limited missions like protecting our embassy and civilians and dealing with al-Qaeda remnants, and perhaps training the Iraqi security forces if they make adequate political progress. But we cannot stay indefinitely. Well, his view has always been that by indicating to the Iraqis that we were not going to be there in perpetuity, in permanent basis forever, which is essentially John McCain's view, that we would actually encourage them to make the political compromises that they've been reluctant to make so far. And that this political progress, which is essential to ending the conflict, would in fact be encouraged by that approach, rather than the blank check approach of the Bush administration and John McCain. The Iraqis are now saying that out loud for themselves. We want to control our sovereignty. We want you to give us that incentive to do so, and the best way to do it, the United States, is to set a timetable for leaving. The Bush administration resisted it, but they're moving in that direction because they frankly have no choice. John McCain is the only one who can't see that Iraq belongs to Iraqis, and that indeed, if they want the United States to leave on a predictable timeline, then we have to do it. It's also the best way to spur political progress.
The trip to Jordan was successful from all accounts, and then crossing into Israel-Palestine, where there were meetings with a range of Israeli leaders and a number of visits to Israeli sites, and a meeting in the West Bank with Prime Minister Fayyad and President Abbas.
And other senior Palestinian officials.
There was criticism on the Palestinian side, and it was even echoed here by some when Senator Obama did a Sunday morning television show with Tom Brokaw, Meet the Press. Brokaw said, you didn't even stop and eat falafel in Jerusalem. You didn't do something on the Palestinian side. that criticism, it's out there. It's real. Palestinians saying we didn't get the attention we deserve. Talk about that. Respond to that, if you would.
Well, I certainly understand that sentiment, and it certainly was not Senator Obama's intention to convey any lack of concern or regard for the Palestinian people. Quite the opposite.